Let's come back to this area of trust again.
Yes.
Are we trusting enough now to allow progress towards digital government to happen and to bed in and to be successful?
I think it's moved forwards a big leap. However, trust, as I started on this conversation, just to add another layer to it, I think the worst thing governments can do when it comes to building trust is have a kind of black box solution that people just can't see how the answer arrived. And we're hearing a lot about AI and machine learning, and that's probably one of the examples I'd like to pick on. So in the move to digital, as I indicated earlier, public sector is using a lot more data for a lot more decision making and a lot more algorithms for that, as part of that decision making. And if bodies, and the same with companies, do that in a kind of black box manner so the public cannot see how the answers was deduced, then there's inherently not a complete lack of trust, but less trusting of the outcome. So let me give you one example. We did some work with Moorfields Eye Hospital in London to look at how you can use machine learning to detect eye disease. So that is now in place. A consultant has a machine learning model that looks at an eye scan. The machine learning model says, you should look at this patient because there is a probability, and it comes up with the actual number, 80%, 84%, whatever it is, that this patient has an issue. And it also identifies where it believes that patient has an issue, some abnormality in the scan. So that is what we call in Google explainable AI. You can, therefore, it's not just a black box answer, look at this patient has this clinical problem. It explains to some level why that patient has that issue. And I think no matter where we apply artificial intelligence, we need to really have that explainable AI attitude to try and build more and more trust. And also to make sure that in these models, we don't forget what I call the outliers. There's always cases in human society who don't fit these models. Hence, normally a machine learning model will only say it's 85% certainty that this patient has this. Even though the majority of us might suffer from that particular eye disease, if we get it, there's always going to be an outlier, which is why you always need the human consultant to have a look.
So it's a big area, this big data, data insights for Google Cloud. If we go back to our example, probably forgotten now, Ministry of Habitation.
Yes.
AI, machine learning, is this going to be able to help them in terms of the services that they need to offer to citizens?
Ultimately, yes. Embed AI machine learning in, first of all, the business processes. So as we've touched on earlier, let's assume that this organisation will get a lot of inbound inquiries, either on the internet or by telephone into call centres. There's a lot of very mature technology now, contact centre AI, that we can embed into call centres to help people calling in get the answer quicker and more accurately. So that is the first use case for AI machine learning. It is now very mature, actually. And in fact, for example, we deployed this in Spain when this whole COVID crisis hit, and the government stood up and announced they were going to put in some unemployment benefits for the nation, and we had thousands and thousands of calls coming in every minute. And this technology can handle it, whereas you could imagine the size of the call centre needed to handle that if it was all human beings. So that's one place, but then take this further. How do you gain some business insight out of the data that organisation holds and other public sector bodies? We've often heard that public sector has lots of data in stovepipes, sometimes for very good reasons, but sharing the volumes of data that government has in a secure environment and in a way that also data privacy is protected is paramount. And there are technologies now that can enable you to do that, to get a better outcome for the citizen or the business. In this case, it sounds to be like the citizen, quicker for the person that's operating that service for the citizen. And there are technologies that we have, like Omni BigQuery, which enables you to kind of take the data from each of those silos and do some rapid analysis and come up with some insights. So this is about, I would describe it as looking through the front windscreen of the car rather than driving through the rear mirror, trying to predict what's going to happen trying to get better citizen outcomes.
The trouble is, for public sector, there's often so much in the rear mirror that's got to be dragged along and connected up as well. But is this the moment? I'll come to another question in a second, actually. But is this the moment when a fully managed serverless cloud data warehouse embedded with AI capability, is this the moment that the Ministry of Habitation should be going into that? And will that help their overall transformation plans?
Well, Michael, you'd expect me to say yes, coming from Google Cloud, of course. but seriously, on the one hand, it reduces the organisation's time and effort invested in managing infrastructure, swapping disks over, doing security upgrades and so on. And if it's serverless, in other words, a company such as Google Cloud is effectively managing all that for you, it enables the organisation to focus more on those big business outcomes I keep talking about. So even the IT department, who would have traditionally done those kind of activities, can now start to shift their focus of attention on supporting the board in their business objectives.
Far more strategic.
Where is the data that they need to achieve that? And worrying about those, actually, to be honest, much more interesting technical challenges.
Okay, I mean, it was an easy question, that. So if this one's hard, it's your turn to have it.
Okay.
Here we go. Is there a hidden contradiction in the combined office-home work model? For example, if given the choice, wouldn't most staff choose to be in the office when everyone else is in the office to gain the social and creative benefits, but opt to work from home at a time when they maximise their work-life balance benefits? Will this lead to an office which is very busy, guess when, Tuesday to Thursday, but empty Friday to Monday? So does this pattern of occupancy level does this kind of pattern of occupancy level contrasted with a need for capacity at peak make the office an expensive option? Is that a hard one?
No.
Well, I'm not going to give it to you then. Okay.
It's a great question.
Margarete, yes.
And I think it's going to happen to all of us, right, where we're going to have peaks and troughs. And I think that comes down to taking a systematic, a programmatic approach to saying, what's the capacity? How do we make work sites secure so that we don't encourage the spread of this pandemic and that we contain it? So we absolutely want to drive productivity and collaboration, and we all recognise the need for social interaction, and we miss our friends in work, right? So we want to get back in, but I think it's got to be done. Security and safety is top of mind for all of us as leaders, and we've got to make sure that's balanced. So I think the strategy, all of us will be working out, like, what is the capacity? How do we stagger different arrival times, different collaboration times? How do we create spaces where they're secure and open plan and all of that? So that's all ahead of us, right, as we work that through with this hybrid model of who comes back when.
But interestingly, here the employee is going, and to suit me, I'll be in sometime Tuesday to Thursday, not Monday or Friday.
Yeah.
And I'll come in later, not because it suits the work, but because I can get cheaper train tickets
Yeah.
or whatever. Clay, have you come across this? Are you having to deal with this?
So what we've started planning for, and like everything else, we've reused an idea someone else had, because the best ideas usually aren't your own. Where we've looked at it and said, in situations where we have the ability for people to work home now, because we still have 1,000 people that have to go to the office today. So thank you to them, right, for continuing to do that. But for everyone else, what we've looked at is actually basically first coming back in terms of assigning days to teams that need to collaborate, right? So you get to a staggered approach. Again, once the time is right, and generally we don't think it's quite there yet, but when we have a plan that would say, the three of us or four of us collaborate on Monday and Tuesday, right, and the others do on Tuesday on Wednesday and Thursday, right, or staggered some. So we see it as probably a staggered approach initially, but also based on permission.
On permission?
So you have to be given permission to come on this day.
Right, but do you also have to be told this is when your team is in?
That's a different question, yes. To be honest with you. But that will be somewhat up to the teams, but also up to the environment and where the pandemic is. Right, Margarete's point. It's not clear how that's going to play out. To be honest with you, right now.
Yeah, and it's the human factor that's involved in this. Melinda, what are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I think we all are dealing right in the middle of these conversations right now with our organizations, and I think. Very similar. We're going to have a staggered approach, possibly a reservation system, where people are reserving. I hadn't actually thought about the team. That's a great idea around the teams having certain days that are assigned. Again, staggered days. But we're still encouraging, for the most part, employees to work from home, I think even where offices are open. And then also taking a look at those employees I mentioned earlier that really might have a strong need to get to the office, that need a place to work other than their home for a variety of different reasons. And so it's requiring us to take stock of that with our teams to understand, hey, who really needs to be here, who is fine working at home, because for the foreseeable future, we will have some kind of limited capacity within our office, even when it does open.
So this affects every organisation.
Yeah.
Let's come back to the public sector and Mark, the government side of things. And we did talk about this a little bit a while ago, but you talked about how the public need to see why decisions are being made and so on. That sort of open, accessible decision making, and the open, accessible, flexible way of working as well. That is totally secure and that is, operational within existing government systems.
Yeah.
A lot of problems there. Can that all be tied up in the short term?
It's going to take some time because some of these are quite complex and these systems have been around 40, 50 years and quite unique, so it will take some time. But I think to move to a more agile world, which is what the world has rapidly become, then organisations do need to address this head on. I think that agility is a core watchword that different technologies around that have certainly companies that have been born in the cloud have embraced, but that's a different world to the public sector and particularly big departments like this. And so starting to move to this new agile kind of technologies that enable you to release, for example, new releases of software, changes to, and we're all familiar with this in our consumer lives, doing this quickly and in an agile fashion is now what the population is expecting from our governments. And so there's yet more pressure on the public sector because as consumers, we've got used to this in our own worlds. And we demand, because we're quite demanding, I think, on why can't a government actually change this service? But that's because most people do not understand the complexities of operating a large public sector body such as this. And that's partly because, as we touched on, government departments have to serve everyone. They have to serve the digital divide, as we've talked extensively, but they also have a duty to look for things like fraud or error. It's not just a case of, this is taxpayer money, so there's lots of other aspects a department like this will have to worry about, because I imagine the case study is around home benefits and social welfare housing and so on and so forth. So it's quite a complex scenario, and when you actually look at the different personas that the whole population can bring into a department like that, there's many, many different use cases that government has to address.
It is moving things forward difficult for the public sector because it's complicated, or is it an attitude thing as well? And one could say, with some justification, areas of government having brought in systems which were sold to them, which kind of didn't do what they were meant to. So, and now we're saying to government, you need to move quickly on this one. They're not going to want to.
Well, I think always at the point in time, the buyer and the seller are always doing what is right in that point in time, but the world moves quickly. And, I think, as we've been talking extensively here, the world has moved on. There's a complete sea change, so it's now a different point in time. And so public sector bodies now will be looking at how they embrace these new technologies. And what was done in history is literally that history, and it's how do you keep that change going? And that's what business has found. You just can't sit still. You just can't stand still.
So give us some quick wins then. Long-term strategy as well, but some quick wins for the Ministry of Habitation, which perhaps are applicable to other areas of public sector as well, we hope.
Yeah.
What are the quick wins they should go for?
Well, certainly you've got to embrace the home working technologies, as we talked about. I describe that as a bit like the tip of the iceberg. It's just moving from the office, as we described, into the home environment. But also, as we talked about, it's making sure they've got that underlying infrastructure that is capable of supporting their business. But the quick wins will probably come around the property portfolio, which seems extensive. So there might be an opportunity to potentially save cost or reconfigure that to deliver better services as they can move most of the population to an online model, to strengthen their contact centres, their websites. These can be relatively quick, so you can keep the legacy systems in place by putting a layer of technology above them to actually enable those services to be delivered. But there's a number of areas of quick wins. This is a huge organisation, The big prizes will be the harder ones, inevitably.
And of course, dealing with politics, there will be the will, presumably, to look for the quick wins that the public will like to see. And that's not always what may be best for government and its processes and organisations.
That's always a challenge in government. You've got the politics on the one hand, and you've got the challenge of delivering out on the other.
Okay.
Can I just add to Mark's point? I think, Mark, the public sector has really stood up for everybody from the private sector lens. We've all really appreciated the public sector throughout this pandemic.
Yeah.
You know, if we think about the NHS, HMRC, DWP, they've all gone the extra mile to keep services going and business continuity, and we recognise that. And so for all of us in the private sector, I think we're hugely grateful to the additional stretch that the public sector has gone through. And I also think there's a fundamental shift. The Economist wrote a piece, or published a piece last week, on the fundamental shift of the role of the office and the future of the office, you know, the 9 to 5 or the 8 to 6. This is now a time for us to really think through the layout, as you touched on, the real estate, how we work in the office, how we collaborate digitally. So, you know, it opens up all kinds of opportunities for us to really work very differently moving forward. And I think we've got to look at the positives. But I think we're hugely appreciative of how adaptable the public sector has been.
And there is a danger, perhaps, of lumping the public sector. I mean, you know, some of them, and we're here in London now, and we look at some of the buildings they're in, and they're old, historic buildings. And there's a danger, perhaps, that we think that's the way the public sector works. And yet there are very innovative bits of the public sector. There are very innovative people working in it. There are people really with fantastic ideas. But the difficulty is sometimes, obviously, getting it through the system, I would have thought.
Inertia, absolutely. You know, but as you said, like, we're seeing change now that's been accelerated, where we haven't spent loads of time reviewing a business case because we just know intuitively we've got to keep going and we've got to serve customers. And I think a lot of those government departments with large employee bases have really made those leaps overnight, you know. So I think let's hope we can try and continue this momentum. But I think certainly the appreciation by the private sector and almost the collaboration between the private and the public to get through this and find solutions in the short term has been unprecedented. So let's hope that that goodwill continues and that appreciation continues.
Fantastic to hear your thoughts today. I don't know if we'll have any other questions that we can get through at this point, but fantastic to hear your thoughts. And also interesting, I mean, I love the fact that, Melinda, at one point you said, yeah, I haven't thought of that. Because this is what today is about. And I hope for people who are joining us as well, it's about, didn't think of that, let's do that. Let's talk to people, let's share things. Can I just ask maybe what you've picked up or what the main themes are that you've pulled out of what you've heard people discussing and the questions that have come in and maybe the results of the polls and so on? As I referred to you, Melinda, anything that you go, this is what we really ought to take out of this?
You know, I think there's so many things, I think, to take out of it. I think the commonality of the conversation and what I've heard from everyone and some of the challenges and the way that we're seeing companies address what's in front of us and the challenge that the pandemic in particular has brought is probably the biggest takeaway, is that we're all working through this in one way or another, and that there are many answers, but there's probably just as many questions around how we proceed forward. I would say that's probably the biggest takeaway, and that the pandemic can also, and what we're dealing with and coming out of, hopefully eventually COVID-19, can be a massive catalyst for change, and that we can move much faster than I think any of us thought was possible before. It's forced it, and the results have been, I think, in change have been good so far. So continue that.
Okay, good. Mark?
I think certainly trust seems to have been a common theme across here, and it's also reminded me again of the digital divide, which is never a bad thing. But I also love the term organisations need to try and liberate their data for some outcome, whether that's delivering better patient care, as you talked about at the beginning, Clay, or maybe needing to re-engineer some of those processes, or deliver furniture. You know, there's a lot of data behind all these processes, and you've got to liberate that data for the benefit of the business, securely and safely, I would add.
And Margarete?
I think just building on the points, resilience, really. So both business resilience, personal resilience, cyber resilience coming through all the way, leveraging the points around trust and a sense of community. So I think this has been a great opportunity to learn and share ideas around how we will move forward.
I love that word, share. So what have we said there? We've said we're working through this together. This is a catalyst for change, the importance of trust and building on that trust and recognizing that trust, liberating the data, personal resilience, sharing our thoughts. Thank you for your thoughts today. We really, at this point, are coming now to the end of the, this first virtual connected experience. So, Clay, your thoughts on what we've pulled out of today to start with? What are the main issues?
Before you put issues, are just a feeling, right? Which is wow, right? So great contributions, right, in the room. Made me think quite a bit, right? And I've already thought about it quite a bit, so it's not on a zero base, understanding. And then so many good comments that are coming in. So just a great time spent, right? Really rewarding, right? I'm walking out of here, kind of bouncing. But I think we've talked about a lot of the common things. I mean, the one that I was missing and hadn't thought through enough was, I think, as part of our big diversity and inclusion package, we need to think about those that are in digitally challenged environments, right? And making sure that in the same way that we think about sexual orientation or ethnicity or gender, right, that we need to make sure that, or armed forces, that there's a network there of people that we've got to figure out how we serve better.
Because funnily enough, otherwise we end up discriminating against them.
That's right.
Because of how we work. Right. We wanted today, and I know you wanted very much, to help the Atos community prepare for the future. Do you think, have we achieved that to some point?
Well, I'll have to listen to the viewers, but yes, without a doubt. I mean, if anyone's feeling like I've felt in terms of the enrichment and the enlightenment that I've gotten out of it, then it has to be a resounding yes, right? And Michael, big thanks to you and the panel for leading us through this and making me think, to a great degree, which is great. Thank you so much.
Clay, thank you. Melinda, Margarete, thank you very much indeed. If you haven't been able to watch the entire event, what I can tell you is that the different sessions are going to be posted to atos.com. We're going to send you a special link for that by email, so you can go back to that and think it through and think what else you can pull out of this, or indeed, as I say, bits you haven't seen. I hope you've enjoyed this event. I hope you found it interesting, stimulating lots of ideas coming forward. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Maybe we'll find out what happened to those companies when we get together again in the new year. But from all of us, thank you ever so much.